They laughed at him, not just behind closed doors but right to his face, as if his resume meant nothing, as if his Ivy League degree was a joke, as if the brilliance in his eyes and the determination in his heart could be dismissed with a smirk and a pat on the back followed by the words, "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." What they didn't know was that the man standing humbly in that polished glass lobby, wearing a navy blue suit passed down from his father, was about to change everything. Because sometimes the person you look down on is the one who ends up looking down on you, not with contempt, but with the righteous weight of justice and vindication in his soul. Meet Malcolm Carter, a name they'd soon remember. When Malcolm stepped into Grayson and Hill Capital for the interview, he came prepared. Not just with a briefcase filled with proposals, projections, and market disruption strategies, but with a lifetime of battles fought on the streets of South Chicago, where he learned early on how to speak with clarity, move with precision, and dream beyond concrete ceilings. The receptionist looked at him as if he were lost, her painted smile stiff as she said, "Deliveries go around back." Malcolm didn't flinch. He just smiled, "I have a 10 a.m. with Ms. Langston." Her eyebrows rose, just slightly, but enough for him to notice. Upstairs, in the conference room, he found himself seated before a panel of executives, all white, all older, all wearing the same forced expressions of interest they likely reserved for compliance purposes. Malcolm's presentation on scaling underserved markets and modernizing private equity structures in inner-city development was brilliant. He knew it. They knew it. But halfway through his proposal, one of the partners, a silver-haired man named Warren Kilpatrick, chuckled and said, "You know, Malcolm, this is very passionate. But we're looking for someone who understands the culture here." Another chimed in, "It's just a bit aggressive, don't you think?" A third said, "We're more conservative with our outreach strategies. This approach feels a little urban." Urban. Aggressive. Not a cultural fit. Malcolm had heard those words before. They were code, dog whistles wrapped in business lingo. But he remained composed. "Thank you for your feedback," he said, shaking their hands at the end. He left with his chin high, though he felt the sting of rejection deeper than most could ever imagine. Weeks passed. No callbacks. No offers. Word eventually reached him through a friend inside the company. The position went to a man named Travis Whitmore, mediocre GPA, fewer credentials, and no real passion for the work, but connected to someone on the board. Of course. The old game of connections over competence. Malcolm felt the bitterness rise but refused to let it drown him. Instead he built. He started his own firm, Carter Strategic Ventures, with 2 laptops, a kitchen table, and grit that couldn't be measured on paper. While others slept, he networked. While others partied, he studied. And slowly clients began to notice. A struggling tech startup in Detroit hired him. Then a renewable energy group out of Atlanta. Then a minority-run housing initiative in Newark. Within 5 years, his firm managed nearly $700 million in assets and was growing faster than even he could have imagined. Meanwhile, back at Grayson and Hill, cracks were beginning to show. The market had shifted. Clients were pulling out. The firm was hemorrhaging money, in part because it had failed to adapt to the very demographic and structural trends Malcolm had warned them about in his rejected proposal. But the partners were too proud, or too blind, to admit it. One of their biggest investors, a major pension fund, issued an ultimatum: modernize or lose everything. Desperate, they started looking for firms to merge with, firms that could save them from collapse. Guess whose firm was at the top of the list? That's right. Carter Strategic Ventures. And Malcolm? Well, he was no longer the man they dismissed in the lobby. Now he walked into buildings where CEOs stood up when he entered. Where the same kinds of men who once mocked him now hung on his every word, hoping to be rescued. And so, one fateful Thursday morning, Malcolm returned to Grayson and Hill. This time, not for an interview, but for a meeting in their executive boardroom to discuss a potential merger. He arrived in a tailored charcoal suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his voice calm but commanding. Some of the same partners from before were still there, older, grayer, more nervous. They pretended not to recognize him at first. But then Warren Kilpatrick, still clinging to his chair, squinted and said, "Wait, have we met before?" Malcolm smiled, "Yes." "What?" "A long time ago." The deal on the table was clear. Grayson and Hill needed capital, operational restructuring, and modern leadership. Malcolm could provide all 3, but on one condition: complete control. The board balked. Warren scoffed. "You want to run the firm?" No, Malcolm said, I want to own it. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. After hours of back and forth, egos bruised and pride swallowed, the board finally caved. The papers were signed. And just like that, the man they once called too urban became their CEO. But Malcolm wasn't done. Not yet. Because while some in the firm reluctantly accepted the new leadership, others conspired behind closed doors. In particular, Travis Whitmore, the man who got the job Malcolm was denied years ago, was now a senior director, and he didn't like taking orders from someone he once believed was beneath him. Late one night, Malcolm received an anonymous email. Inside, attachments, internal memos, and whistleblower documents pointing to something sinister. Illegal dealings, discriminatory hiring practices, and forged compliance reports, all buried deep in the HR and finance departments, dating back a decade. And at the center of it all? Travis Whitmore. But if Malcolm brought this to light, it could cause the firm's collapse, and with it, the jobs of hundreds of honest employees who had nothing to do with the corruption. He faced a choice: protect the legacy he'd just begun to build, or expose the darkness at its core and risk everything. The next morning he sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing screen, the documents open before him, his fingers hovering over the mouse. His heart pounded. Outside, the city skyline shimmered in the morning sun. Then the door creaked open. His assistant peeked in and said, "Sir, you need to see this. It's urgent. The FBI is downstairs asking for you." Malcolm Carter rose slowly from his desk, the weight of years crashing down in a single breath as his assistant's words hung in the air. "The FBI is downstairs asking for you." His heart didn't race, his palms didn't sweat, because Malcolm Carter was not a man who feared justice. He was a man who fought for it. But in that moment even he had to wonder, was this about the files he'd received last night? The whistleblower documents that revealed decades of corruption buried deep within Grayson and Hill? Or had Travis Whitmore and his old money cronies flipped the script in a desperate act of retaliation? As Malcolm descended the marble stairs of the Grayson and Hill lobby, the memories of his first visit to this building flashed in his mind. The humiliation, the smug glances, the coded language meant to keep people like him out. Now the tables had turned. Two sharply dressed agents stood at the front, identifying themselves with quick flashes of silver badges. Agent Ramirez and Agent Shaw. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to speak to you, privately," Ramirez said, with a kind of firmness that made it clear this wasn't a request. Malcolm nodded, gesturing to a quiet executive lounge where the walls were lined with mahogany and the windows overlooked the skyline. Once seated, Shaw slid a folder across the table. "You received some documents last night. We know. The sender is part of a federal investigation into securities fraud, labor violations, and racial discrimination. You're not under investigation, yet. But you are in possession of federal evidence." Malcolm studied their eyes. They weren't here to threaten him. They were here because the entire operation at Grayson and Hill was on the verge of crumbling under its own rot. "We need your cooperation," Ramirez continued. "And if you help us build this case, you won't just clean house. You'll change the entire industry." Malcolm leaned back in the chair, hands clasped, a storm brewing behind his calm expression. He knew what this meant. If he gave the FBI what they wanted, it could destroy the company he just took over, the brand he had begun to rebuild. Hundreds of innocent employees, many of whom had families, mortgages, lives depending on the firm, could be caught in the fallout. But if he stayed silent, the rot would grow. Travis Whitmore and the Shadow Council of Insiders would continue their schemes, confident that they were above the law, because for too long they had been. Later that night, Malcolm sat alone in his penthouse office, the city glowing beneath him, the documents spread across his desk like ghosts whispering in the dark. He thought of his father, who'd been laid off by a company that chose nepotism over merit, of his mother, who scrubbed hotel rooms so he could afford prep school, of the young black interns he'd brought into his firm to give them what no one gave him, opportunity. He picked up the phone. "Agent Ramirez. I'm in." The next several weeks were a storm of secrecy. Malcolm met the FBI at night, submitting evidence, connecting the dots, helping them uncover a criminal enterprise that stretched back over 20 years. Shell companies, fake diversity audits, falsified board reports, hush money payments, everything. And the entire trail led back to Travis Whitmore. Meanwhile, at the firm, Malcolm played his role to perfection. Smiling during board meetings, shaking hands with shareholders, all while wearing a wire under his $3,000 suit. His heart pounded every time he passed Travis in the hallway, knowing that the man who once took his dream job was about to be exposed on a national stage. Then came the moment of truth. Malcolm was scheduled to deliver the firm's quarterly earnings report to the entire executive team. The media would be watching. Investors would be dialed in. Everyone expected a victory speech. Instead, Malcolm walked onto the stage holding a sleek black folder. The lights dimmed. The room hushed. "Before I begin," Malcolm said, his voice steady, "I need to address something far more important than profit margins and market projections." He opened the folder. On the screens behind him, documents began to appear. Real documents. HR complaints that were buried. Pay disparity spreadsheets. Emails where partners laughed about diversity hires. Gasps echoed through the room. The truth was out. This firm, Malcolm said, was built on exclusion. But not anymore. The room erupted into chaos. Executives shouting. Lawyers running for phones. But Malcolm raised a hand. "I'm not done." That's when the doors burst open, and the FBI swarmed in. Ramirez. Armed agents surrounding the boardroom like a scene out of a crime thriller. Travis Whitmore stood up, eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Agent Ramirez stepped forward, badge raised. "Travis Whitmore, you are under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and racial discrimination in hiring practices." The moment felt like time itself had paused. Malcolm stood tall, unblinking as Travis was cuffed and led away, screaming about privilege, politics, persecution. But it was too late. The truth had finally surfaced. And Malcolm? He became more than just CEO, he became a symbol. A living reminder that resilience, when powered by righteousness, can shake the very foundation of the elite. But just as he began to clean house, just as Malcolm thought the worst was over, the real storm began. Because in the fallout, someone from within, someone powerful, decided to retaliate. The very next day, Malcolm received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in all caps. "You think this is over? We never let one of you win." And tucked in the envelope, a picture of his mother's house, with the front window shattered. Malcolm Carter didn't flinch as he stared at the picture, his mother's modest two-story home framed in cold ink and violence, the broken front window like a silent scream from a battlefield he thought he'd already conquered, only to discover the war had just begun, and this time it was personal. For a few long seconds, the CEO of Grayson and Hill, who had just dismantled a corrupt empire in front of national news cameras, felt like the scared little boy from East Baltimore again, watching his mother duct tape holes in the walls to keep the rats out, watching her hands bleed from cleaning other people's homes just to keep food on the table, all so he could dream big in a world designed to keep people like him small. But Malcolm wasn't that boy anymore. And whoever sent that message had made a fatal mistake. They reminded him why he started this fight in the first place. Immediately, Malcolm activated his private security detail, dispatched a team to guard his mother around the clock, then called Agent Ramirez, who ordered a federal threat assessment and began tracing the source of the photo. Though the envelope had no fingerprints, no DNA, no traceable metadata. Someone with access. Someone inside. The rot hadn't been fully purged. Not yet. Meanwhile, the fallout from Travis Whitmore's arrest shook the financial world. Stocks dipped, media swarmed, and Malcolm became a national sensation. Headlines painted him as both hero and traitor depending on which network you watched. Inside the company, senior partners started flipping, desperate to save themselves. Whistleblowers emerged. A hidden network of racial bias, insider trading, and backdoor deals exploded into public view. But the more Malcolm exposed, the more the shadows pushed back. One night, while reviewing internal documents alone in his office, long after the lights had dimmed and the building had emptied, his laptop screen flickered and went black. Then, slowly, one sentence appeared on the screen in red typeface. "We built this tower. You were just cleaning the windows." His phone buzzed next. A known number. A distorted voice. "You were never supposed to get this far, Malcolm. You think you're untouchable. You're not. Look outside." Malcolm turned and pulled the blinds open, and there, across the rooftop of the adjacent building, stood a figure in all black, motionless, watching him. Seconds later, they vanished into the night. It was psychological warfare now. A game not just of power but endurance. But Malcolm didn't rise from poverty, didn't navigate Ivy League hallways filled with fake smiles and veiled threats, didn't survive the cutthroat world of corporate law and boardroom betrayals to be broken by cowards hiding in shadows. He called an emergency meeting the next morning. All department heads. Every executive. Every person with a title. "Let me be clear," Malcolm said, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "This company is no longer run by fear. If you're part of the problem, your time here is over. If you're part of the solution, then get ready to work twice as hard because we are going to rebuild this company brick by brick, honestly, transparently, and equitably." The room was dead silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the entire floor was on their feet. The tides were shifting. But victory always comes at a cost. That night, while walking to his car in the underground garage, Malcolm noticed something strange. His security guard was missing from his usual post. The cameras were off. His gut told him to turn around, but it was too late. A black SUV screeched around the corner. Doors flew open. 4 masked men jumped out. Malcolm ran, heart pounding, but the concrete walls echoed every step. He ducked behind a pillar, yanked out his phone. No signal. Just as the men closed in, the screech of tires echoed again. Another SUV. This time it was Ramirez and 2 FBI agents. Gunfire erupted. The masked men scattered. One was caught. The others disappeared. As Malcolm was ushered into the safety of the second vehicle, Ramirez looked at him grimly. "That wasn't random. They were set. And the guy we caught? Former private contractor, military background. Someone very connected, paid a lot to make you disappear." Back at FBI headquarters, Malcolm watched through a glass wall as the man they captured sat silently, refusing to speak, lawyered up by someone high profile. But just before the door closed, the man looked straight at Malcolm, grinned, and mouthed 2 chilling words, "She's next." Malcolm's heart dropped. He rushed out, already calling his mother's number. No answer. Again. No answer. He called the security team stationed at her house. Still no answer. The line went dead. Ramirez jumped into action. "We're sending a team now," she said, her voice urgent, already barking orders into her comms. But Malcolm was done waiting. "I'm going too." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the quiet street in his old neighborhood. His mother's house was dark. Too dark. The porch light was shattered. The front door, ajar. Malcolm sprinted up the steps, Ramirez behind him. Inside, the living room was wrecked. Furniture overturned. Picture frames broken. The scent of pepper spray and cologne hung thick in the air. "Mom?" he yelled. "Mom." No answer. Then a sound, barely audible, from the kitchen. Malcolm pushed through. There, taped to the refrigerator, was a note. Handwritten. "You exposed us. Now we expose you. The next move is yours. Tick-tock." And below it, his mother's necklace. Torn. Blood on the chain. Malcolm gripped the refrigerator door to steady himself, every muscle in his body shaking. Agent Ramirez approached slowly. "We'll find her," she said. "We'll bring her home." But Malcolm's eyes burned with a fire the FBI hadn't seen before. "No," he said. "I'll bring her home. And I'll burn down whatever's left of this system while I do it." And just as he turned to storm out, Ramirez's phone buzzed. She answered, eyes narrowing. "We just got a location hit. She's been taken across state lines." Then she turned to Malcolm, her voice tight. "They're using one of your company's offshore subsidiaries to launder money, and they're holding her at a remote site owned by Grayson and Hill." Malcolm froze. "Wait, that site was supposed to be decommissioned years ago." Ramirez looked at him grimly. "It wasn't. And whoever's behind this, they were never just corporate criminals." She handed Malcolm a folder. Inside was a photo, grainy but clear. A man shaking hands with Travis Whitmore at a secret boardroom meeting years ago. A man Malcolm knew all too well. His mentor. The man who helped him rise in the firm. The man he once called a father figure. "Richard Calloway," Malcolm whispered, jaw tightening. "He's still pulling the strings." Ramirez nodded. "And he's still inside the company." Malcolm's voice turned to steel. "Then this isn't just about justice anymore. It's about war." Malcolm Carter stared at the photo of Richard Calloway shaking hands with Travis Whitmore, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. All this time, the man who had vouched for him, guided him, and even toasted his promotion, was secretly orchestrating the very system that tried to destroy him. And now, that same man was holding his mother hostage in a remote facility owned by one of Grayson and Hill's old shell companies. This wasn't just about race or corporate greed anymore. This was about legacy, power, and the depth of betrayal that cuts so deep, it leaves scars on your soul. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists, but his mind was razor-sharp. Ramirez and her federal team prepped for the raid, planning a full-scale takedown. But Malcolm insisted on going with them. "She's my mother. You don't leave me behind," he growled. Ramirez hesitated. Protocol said no, but she saw it in his eyes. Malcolm wasn't going to sit this out. Not after what they took from him. They geared up, armored vans rolling through backwoods roads until they reached the hidden compound. Surveillance drones picked up movement, armed guards, encrypted comms, infrared sensors surrounding the perimeter. This wasn't a random facility, this was a stronghold. And deep inside, in a cold concrete cell with no windows, sat Mrs. Carter, battered but unbroken, whispering prayers and believing with everything she had that her son was coming. Malcolm, dressed in tactical gear and bulletproof vest, moved with precision alongside the FBI's Special Ops unit. They breached at dawn. Explosions rocked the front gates while agents stormed the grounds. Gunfire erupted. Chaos exploded. But Malcolm's focus was unshakable. He sprinted toward the east wing, Ramirez at his six, kicking open steel doors and shouting his mother's name. Then he heard it. A muffled cry. "Malcolm?" The voice stopped him cold. He turned. Down a narrow hallway. A single guard stood outside a locked cell, rifle raised. Malcolm didn't hesitate. He tackled the man full force, slamming him into the wall as the rifle clattered across the floor. Ramirez covered him, shouting, "Go! Get her out!" Malcolm ripped open the cell door. There she was, bruised but alive. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Baby, I knew you'd come." He scooped her into his arms, whispering, "I got you, Mama. It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because just as they exited the cell block, a hidden door slid open in the wall, and out stepped Richard Calloway, flanked by two private security mercenaries in full tactical gear, guns aimed and ready. Well, Calloway sneered, his voice calm, his silver hair slicked back like a wolf in sheep's clothing. "The prodigal son returns. You know, Malcolm, I always admired your ambition. But you never understood the game. You were supposed to be the face. The illusion of progress. We gave you just enough rope to believe you were free." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You used me. You let them humiliate me. You kidnapped my mother." Calloway laughed coldly. "That's where you're wrong. You were never a threat, until you started pulling back the curtain. That was your mistake." Ramirez raised her weapon. "Don't move, Calloway." But Calloway smirked. "You think I'd be here if I didn't control every piece on the board? I own judges, senators, even half your agency." And then he dropped the real bombshell. "And that board vote that made you CEO? I orchestrated that too. It was the perfect setup. Let the black savior take the fall while I moved billions offshore." Malcolm's breath caught. It couldn't be true. But deep down, it made sense. The promotion, the timing, the power shift, it was all a game. But Calloway had miscalculated one thing, Malcolm's resolve. "You think you still own this company?" Malcolm said, stepping forward. "You don't own a damn thing anymore. I've got the files. I've got the evidence. And now I've got you." Ramirez's team surrounded them. The mercenaries dropped their weapons. Calloway, ever arrogant, held his hands out like a man making a deal instead of facing prison. But just as they cuffed him, his smile widened. "It's already too late," he whispered. "Check the company servers. I left you a present." Back at HQ, as the FBI combed through encrypted data, alarms blared. Grayson and Hill's servers were being wiped. Offshore accounts vanished. Millions disappeared in real time. Key witnesses disappeared. Some found dead. The company Malcolm worked so hard to reform was under cyber siege. "He's burning it all down," Ramirez said, furious. This was his final play. And it worked. The media flipped the narrative. Stocks crashed. Executives resigned. Malcolm was accused of insider leaks, even sabotage. Fake documents were planted to frame him. "They're making me the villain," he said in disbelief. He planned this from the beginning. His name was dragged through headlines. Sponsors pulled out. Lawsuits flooded in. And as if the fire wasn't hot enough, a mysterious video surfaced, heavily edited, showing Malcolm arguing with Travis Whitmore on the day of his arrest. The footage twisted to make it look like Malcolm threatened him. It went viral. Public opinion turned. Ramirez urged him to go underground. "Lay low until we sort this out," she said. But Malcolm couldn't hide. Not now. Not after everything. He looked at her and said, "If they're going to bury me, I'm going to make sure they do it with the truth." And then, something unexpected happened. A mysterious flash drive arrived at Malcolm's penthouse. No return address. Just a sticky note, from someone on the inside. "Use it wisely." Malcolm plugged it in. What he found made his blood run cold, and his eyes burn with renewed purpose. Hidden recordings. Financial ledgers. A master list of every dirty deal Richard Calloway ever made. But at the end of the folder was one final file. Titled only, "The Real Power Behind Grayson and Hill." Malcolm opened it. What he saw left him frozen. It wasn't just Calloway. It wasn't just Travis. There was another name. A name that had never appeared in any of the investigations. Someone still in the shadows. Someone even more powerful. Malcolm turned to Ramirez, who read the name and gasped. "Oh my God," she said. "That's not possible." "If this is real," Malcolm nodded grimly, "then everything we've uncovered so far was just the tip of the iceberg." And just as they prepared to go public, an explosion rocked the FBI safe house where the evidence was stored. Flames lit the sky. Sirens wailed. Everything was gone. All but the copy Malcolm kept on a hidden drive. He backed it up again, this time in multiple locations. But when he returned to his apartment to retrieve his emergency bag, the door was ajar. The lights were off. Inside, a single candle flickered on the coffee table. And in the center, his mother's phone. Smashed. A message on the screen. "We warned you. Now it's your turn to disappear." Malcolm backed away slowly. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, a sharp pain struck his neck. A dart. Tranquilizer. He staggered. Vision blurred. Figures approached. And just before everything went dark, he heard one final whisper, "Let's see how much they care when the black CO vanishes without a trace." Darkness. That was the first thing Malcolm Carter remembered when he woke up. A blinding, suffocating darkness that pressed in from all sides. His hands were bound, his mouth gagged, and his head throbbed with the force of 1,000 needles. He tried to move, to speak, to scream, but all that came out was a low groan swallowed by the void. Then a door creaked open. Light, harsh and sterile, poured into the small concrete room where he was being held. A tall figure stepped in, face obscured by shadows, but the voice, oh, the voice, was unmistakable. Calm, cultured, cruel. "I told you, Malcolm. You were never meant to last." It was him. The shadowy name from the final file. Not Calloway. Not Travis. This man was bigger, deeper. Someone who had quietly orchestrated power moves from behind velvet curtains for decades. Senator Harold Jennings. One of the most respected names in American politics. A legacy figure. Untouchable. And also, it turned out, the silent majority shareholder of Grayson and Hill. "You were supposed to be a symbol," Jennings said as he circled Malcolm like a vulture. "A safe, photogenic, articulate black man who could make us look progressive while we bled the company dry. But you made it personal." Malcolm's eyes burned with rage, even as his limbs refused to move. "You fought back. You looked behind the curtain. You tried to change the game instead of playing your part. That was your mistake." He motioned to someone outside. 2 guards came in, dragging in a monitor. On it, video footage played, Malcolm's face plastered all over the news. "FBI suspect Malcolm Carter escapes custody after arson," the headline read. Ramirez was being smeared, accused of aiding in his disappearance. His name, once praised, was now synonymous with scandal. Jennings smirked. "By the time the world finds your body, you'll be just another disgraced executive who flew too close to the sun." But what Jennings didn't know was that Malcolm had planned for this. Deep in the hidden layers of that flash drive were files set to automatically upload to a secure cloud network every 24 hours unless manually delayed. And this time there would be no more delays. As Jennings monologued like every villain who thought they'd won, Malcolm triggered a hidden microchip embedded in his watch, a silent signal, one he'd given only to Ramirez. Because she knew. She always knew they'd try to erase him. And she'd been watching. Meanwhile, back at FBI HQ, Ramirez and her loyal team had traced the signal. "He's alive," she said. "And if we don't move now, we'll lose him." Within minutes, a covert extraction team was airborne. Helicopters buzzed toward the coordinates embedded in the signal. And as the guards left to prepare for Malcolm's transport, the lights flickered. Sirens wailed. Power cut. Gunfire erupted. And in that chaos, Malcolm saw his chance. Using the sharpened piece of metal he'd hidden in his boot, he sliced through the restraints, took down one of the guards and grabbed a weapon. By the time the extraction team burst through the compound walls, Malcolm was already fighting his way out. Ramirez found him bloodied, limping, but alive. "You always had to make things dramatic," she said, half laughing, half crying. But there was no time to celebrate. "He's still out there," Malcolm said. "And the world still thinks I'm the enemy." They moved fast. The files from the cloud uploaded. Documents, audio recordings, confidential board meeting minutes, all naming names, revealing embezzlement, trafficking, political bribery, systemic discrimination practices buried under layers of PR spin. Malcolm went live that same night. From a secure location with backup from Ramirez and dozens of whistleblowers inspired by his stand. The broadcast was unfiltered, raw, real. "They tried to erase me," he said into the camera, eyes burning with fury and hope. "But I am not a puppet. I am not a symbol. I am a man. And I have the truth." The world listened. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag I stand with Malcolm. Hashtag ceoTruthBomb. Hashtag Black Excellence Unchained. Investigations reopened. Arrests were made. Senator Jennings' accounts were frozen. He was indicted within 72 hours. Calloway and Travis were hauled back into custody. And Grayson and Hill? Under emergency restructuring, Malcolm Carter was reinstated not just as CEO, but with full oversight by a federal watchdog team. But Malcolm wasn't done. He declined the golden parachute. Instead, he dismantled the old system brick by brick. He rebuilt Grayson and Hill as a firm dedicated to diversity, transparency, and social justice. He launched a foundation in his mother's name, helping young black professionals break through glass ceilings in corporate America. The same halls where he was once rejected for being too black, now echoed with his voice, empowering others, changing lives. And 1 year later, on the anniversary of his hostile takedown, Malcolm stood before a global audience at a leadership summit. "They tried to lock me out. They tried to burn me down. But I rose. Because you can't kill the truth. And you can't silence a man who stands for something greater than himself." The crowd rose in thunderous applause. His mother, sitting front row, wiped away tears. Ramirez gave a proud nod. And somewhere, far away behind prison bars, Richard Calloway watched the broadcast in silence, knowing he had lost to the very man he once thought was beneath him. The story of Malcolm Carter wasn't just about revenge. It was about resilience. About rewriting a system meant to hold you down. About proving that no matter how stacked the deck is against you, when you stand for truth, fight with honor, and rise with purpose, justice will always find its way. And so, they refused to hire him because he was black. But in the end, he didn't just take the job, he took the whole damn company and gave it back to the people. The end.